Imagine this. You wake up one morning, not in the literal sense, but in a way that shatters everything. The job you once clung to feels hollow. The goals that lit fires in your belly are now nothing more than smoldering ash. You stare at the same ceiling, walk the same streets, answer to the same name, but something irreversible has shifted. It's as if the scaffolding of your identity has collapsed overnight. But there was no grand event, no catastrophe, just awakening. And now, everything that once gave you drive feels strangely performative, even absurd. Why? Why does awakening so often bring with it a sense of profound demotivation? This isn't mere laziness or burnout. This is existential. It is the aftermath of seeing through the illusion and not knowing what to replace it with. Carl Jung wrote, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life. The awakening strips those disguises away. The roles, worker, lover, achiever, even seeker, begin to feel like masks handed to us by a society that thrives on unconscious repetition. You take the mask off, expecting to find yourself, but what stares back is a terrifying silence. This collapse is not a failure. It is an initiation, and like all initiations, it begins with disintegration. Before, motivation came easily. You chased dreams you were told to want. Career success, social approval, spiritual ascension. You were fueled by a subtle desperation to become someone. But awakening confronts you with the unbearable possibility that you were already someone, and you simply didn't know it. Friedrich Nietzsche warned that he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. The tragedy of awakening is that the why gets stripped away before a new one arrives. In the gap between illusion and authentic vision, a desert stretches wide and unforgiving. This is where most falter, not because the path is unclear, but because the terrain is so vast and the ego so small. You're not just unmotivated, you're deconstructed, and no one tells you that this is part of the process. Feels like a betrayal. You did everything right. You questioned, you meditated, you peeled away the layers of conditioning. But instead of clarity, you're left with a gnawing void. The narrative has stopped, and you are no longer a character with a destination. You are consciousness, naked, unfiltered, and unanchored. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism, believed that all striving is rooted in suffering, that our desires are mere distractions from the silent truth of existence. Awakening often confirms this. You see how much of your motivation was an elaborate escape plan. From death, from meaninglessness, from pain. Now there is no escape, just presence. But presence can feel like paralysis when you haven't yet found your footing in it. You're not alone in this disorientation. Many who've awakened describe it as a death, the death of ambition, of identity, of narrative. The spiritual texts call it ego death. Psychology calls it depersonalization. In myth, it is the descent into the underworld. And yet, beneath the numbness, beneath the gray wash over your once colorful world, something subtle begins to stir. A quiet intelligence. A faint, almost imperceptible awareness that maybe, just maybe, this emptiness is not a problem but a space. A space waiting to be filled with something real. But what is real? What can motivate the one who has seen through the veil? What calls to the soul once it no longer believes in the promises of the world? That question is where the journey begins again. And in the next chapter of this unraveling, we will step deeper into the desert to understand why old motivations must die before new ones can be born, and why the very loss you now mourn might be the womb of your becoming. The silence grows louder in the days following your awakening. No longer lulled by the lullabies of societal success or spiritual bypassing, you find yourself in a liminal place, a desert of disillusionment. You thought awakening would feel like bliss, like clarity, like purpose descending from the heavens. Instead, it feels like being stranded. Everything is stripped bare. Nothing excites you. You don't want to go back to the old life, but you don't know how to live the new one. You are, as Sartre described, condemned to be free. The freedom tastes like ash at first. This desert is not a punishment. It is a passage. But passages require something brutal. Surrender. Not just of desire, but of the very mechanism of desire, the need for things to be different than they are. You once had so many dreams, and now they seem like echoes from a former life. You wonder if you're broken, if the fire is gone forever. But this fire was never yours. It was borrowed, inherited, fueled by fear and fantasy. Awakening burns that down to its core. Aldous Huxley once wrote, "Experience is not what happens to a man. It is what a man does with what happens to him." And here you are, standing in the wreckage of all that once moved you, unsure of what to do with it. You are not just unmotivated. You are undone. You try to engage with life, but it feels surreal. You eat because you must. You work because bills remain indifferent to enlightenment. You speak to people, but conversations skim the surface while you drown in the depths. You've seen the futility behind ambition, the shadow side of self-improvement. You've glimpsed the emptiness beneath success stories, the quiet despair behind smiling faces. And now you can't unsee it. This is the desert, not a place of suffering but of exposure. It shows you how much of your life was scaffolding, constructed to protect you from the terrifying openness of raw existence. But now there are no walls, just sky, just silence. Many people turn back here. They reassemble the pieces of the old life, find a new goal, chase a new high, pretend the awakening never happened. But for those who cannot forget, who have seen too much to go back, there is only one path, forward into deeper stillness. And that stillness is not passive. It is pregnant. Beneath the surface of this lifeless terrain is a seed, one that can only grow in the soil of surrender. It's not about finding new motivation. It's about learning how to be motivated by something deeper, something true. But that truth does not shout. It whispers. It hides behind moments of awe, in subtle shifts of attention. You might feel it when the wind moves through trees, or in a stranger's eyes, or in the quiet knowing that you're still here, even when everything else has vanished. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps, observed, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." And that is the task now. Not to motivate the old self, but to allow the old self to die fully so something more honest can emerge. This is not depression. It is metamorphosis. Depression paralyzes. Metamorphosis slows you down so radically that every illusion has time to fall away. The caterpillar doesn't just grow wings. It dissolves into mush. Complete disintegration. That's where you are. The mush phase, disassembled, awaiting a form you do not yet know. But the temptation is always there, to rush, to find purpose prematurely, to cling to anything that might numb this raw vulnerability. Don't. Stay. This desert will not kill you. It will burn away everything that isn't truly you. And what's left, though quiet and unassuming, will be indestructible. In the next section, we'll descend even deeper into the heart of this transformation and explore how the architecture of meaning collapses under awakening, and why this collapse is not a tragedy, but a necessary act of liberation. Are you willing to let even your idea of meaning dissolve? Meaning is a dangerous thing, not because it's bad, but because it can be built on illusions, on borrowed stories, cultural scripts, inherited fears, and desperate hopes. Before awakening, your life likely teemed with meaning. There were goals to strive for, identities to uphold, moral codes to follow. There was always a next level, more money, deeper love, higher consciousness. Meaning was abundant, but its abundance was deceptive. It gave you purpose, yes, but only if you stayed asleep. And then you woke up, and the architecture of meaning collapsed. The pillars that held your life together, achievement, approval, even spiritual progress, began to wobble. You saw through them, as if someone had turned on a light in a room that had been beautifully decorated with shadows. And in that harsh light, the furniture of your mind, the stories and beliefs that shaped your reality, dissolved into dust. Jean-Paul Sartre described this condition vividly. Everything has been figured out except how to live. That's what awakening feels like. You suddenly recognize the artificiality of the entire system. The ladder you were climbing is leaning against a wall that doesn't exist. This is why motivation vanishes. Because motivation depends on meaning. And if meaning dies, so does the drive to act. But the collapse of meaning is not nihilism, at least not in its deepest form. It's the necessary dark night before the dawn of authentic meaning. The old meanings, achievement, spiritual enlightenment, social status, were external. They were ideas handed to you, not born from you. Now you're in a space where you can no longer pretend. The motivational slogans don't work. The spiritual mantras feel like noise. Even helping others, which once gave you a noble sense of purpose, feels hollow when done from obligation or self-image. You are in existential freefall. Nothing is inherently meaningful. And paradoxically, that realization is your first step toward liberation. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that life was, by nature, suffering, and that meaning was often a way to dress up this suffering to make it more tolerable. He wrote, "Life swings like a pendulum backward and forward between pain and boredom. For many, that would be a bleak pronouncement. But for those in the midst of awakening, it offers something shocking. Honesty. The kind of honesty that makes space for something real. When you finally admit to yourself, 'I don't know what anything means anymore,' you open the door to a deeper question. Does anything have to mean anything at all? Or can life be lived without the scaffolding of constant justification? This is the question that leads not to despair, but to freedom. Meaning, when imposed, is a cage. Meaning, when discovered from within, is liberation. But you can't get to that place without first letting go of all the secondhand meanings you've ever swallowed whole. The collapse is a kind of sacred amnesia. It's the soul's way of rebooting, wiping the slate, creating the conditions for something unspeakably new. And yet, the temptation to grasp for old meanings will linger. You'll feel an urge to reclaim some identity, some role, even if it's smaller than before. The mind is addicted to certainty. It will whisper, just find a new purpose, build something, be someone again. But if you're courageous enough, you'll resist the urge to fill the void too quickly. Because the void isn't empty, it's pregnant. It contains the raw materials for a new kind of life. One not motivated by fear or fantasy, but by alignment, by resonance, by something you've never been taught to trust, your own inner truth. In the next section, we'll confront the void directly, not as an enemy but as a teacher. We'll explore how stillness, silence, and meaninglessness are not signs of failure, but sacred thresholds into a more authentic being. You've arrived at the edge. The architecture has fallen. Meaning lies in pieces. The roles have been shed like dead skin. You are no longer becoming, you simply are. And yet, the emptiness remains, vast and echoing. This is the void. To the ego, the void is unbearable. It is the absence of everything it once relied upon. Ambition, identity, progress. It whispers that you are nothing, that nothing matters, that you've gone too far and lost too much. But if you can resist the urge to flee, if you can sit in the thick, suffocating silence, you'll begin to feel a shift. The void is not the enemy. The void is the teacher. In fact, it is the only teacher that never lies. Where other guides give maps, the void burns them. Where philosophies offer certainty, the void offers only presence. It refuses to let you hide, not behind ideas, not behind labels, not even behind the noble mask of spiritual awakening. The void teaches by stripping you. Its lessons are not spoken, but carved into your psyche like wind against rock. Its silence is not empty, but saturated with a strange, formless truth. Carl Jung described this process as an encounter with the self, not the egoic self, but the vast, unknowable totality of your being. He wrote, "You do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The void is that darkness, and it must be faced before the light can return. First, it feels like death, and in a way it is, the death of striving, the death of narrative, the death of me as I thought I was. But where death occurs, space is made. And in that space, something begins to grow. Not a motivation driven by desperation, but a quiet inner movement, subtle and alive. You begin to notice strange things. You sit under a tree and, for no reason at all, you feel peace. Not a dramatic joy, not a spiritual high, just a gentle stillness, as if the tree were whispering, "This is enough." You speak to someone, and you are not trying to be understood or admired. You are simply present. You listen, you respond, and for a moment connection flickers into being. Real, unforced, unscripted. You find yourself moved not by grand visions or future goals, but by small, sacred impulses. To create, to rest, to speak honestly, to walk barefoot on the earth. These actions have no agenda. They are not achievements. They are expressions, not of a self trying to become, but of a self that already is. The void, you realize, was never empty. It was full of what you had forgotten. Life before it was filtered through need. Nietzsche once wrote, "Become who you are," but he never said how. The void is the how. It dissolves everything that is not you, so what remains is not an image or idea, but a living presence. In this space, motivation returns. But it looks nothing like what came before. It does not chase. It does not justify. It arises spontaneously from within. Not a hunger, but a harmony. Not a pursuit, but a participation. You are no longer motivated to be someone. You are moved to be. And that subtle movement is the new rhythm of your life. But this life can only begin when you've truly surrendered the old one. Not as a concept, but as a reality. In the next section, we'll explore what it means to build from this place of stillness. To live not in reaction to the world, but in alignment with the quiet pulse of the real. We'll explore how authentic action emerges, not from willpower, but from presence, and why this new kind of motivation may be the most powerful force you've ever known. From the silence of the void, something ancient and unnameable begins to stir. Not in a rush, not with fanfare, but like the slow unfolding of a new season. It is not motivation in the old sense, restless, striving, anxious. It is movement born of stillness. It is action without self-deception. Here, the ego no longer screams for attention. The need to prove, to earn, to become gone. What remains is presence. What arises from that presence is action so natural it feels like breathing. Jean-Paul Sartre believed we are the authors of our own essence, and that our existence precedes our definition. But to write our essence, we must first empty the page. And that is what the void does. It prepares the canvas for something truly original. Not original as in novel, but as in originating from your own deepest truth. You begin to act not out of obligation or fear, but because something within simply moves. You speak not to be liked, but because your silence has ripened into words. You create not to impress, but because beauty demands a vessel and you happen to be here. This is authentic action, and it does not need a reason. Viktor Frankl, whose ideas were forged in the crucible of unimaginable suffering, said, "What is to give light must endure burning. You have endured the burning. Now the light is not something you seek, but something that quietly radiates through you. And the things you do, the conversations you have, the art you make, the ways you choose to show up are no longer instruments of ego. They are expressions of that light. The world may not understand. That's okay. Your actions may look smaller than before, less dramatic, but they are infinitely more powerful. They are not reactions. They are not transactions. They are offerings. There is no urgency anymore. No need to build an empire or become a brand. You are not interested in becoming a symbol. You are interested in becoming real. In this space, your compass is no longer what will bring me success, or even what is the right thing to do. Instead, it becomes, what feels aligned with the truth of this moment? Sometimes that truth means resting. Sometimes it means speaking a hard truth. Sometimes it means walking away. Sometimes it means creating something without knowing why. But always it arises from the same place, stillness. The philosopher Lao Tzu, though not mentioned often in the Western canon, gave a clue when he wrote, "The Tao does nothing, yet leaves nothing undone." This is not passivity, it is receptivity. It is action that flows from reality itself, not from egoic impulse. It is what happens when you no longer resist the moment but become an extension of it. You begin to notice that you are no longer looking for a life purpose. Life itself is the purpose. Living it truthfully, moment by moment, is the only direction that matters. The paradox is clear. Only when you abandon the search for meaning does meaning begin to emanate from you. Only when you stop trying to matter do your actions begin to carry a quiet, resonant weight. Not because they are grand, but because they are true. This kind of motivation doesn't come from goals. It comes from alignment. Alignment with what? With yourself. With the moment. With what is. And this kind of living doesn't just transform what you do. It transforms how you experience doing. Even the mundane becomes luminous when it's no longer distorted by the filters of ambition or fear. In the next and final section, we will explore how this transformation not only births a new kind of life, but also a new kind of responsibility. A life not driven by compulsion, but guided by inner truth, not powered by ego, but offered in service to something larger, quieter, and far more sacred. Are you ready to live, not to become someone, but to serve what you already are? What emerges on the other side of the void is not a perfected self, gleaming with spiritual insight and eternal motivation. What emerges is something far more human, far more real, a self that no longer needs to be anything other than what it is. You walk through the world differently now, not above it, not outside it, but within it, embedded, awake, surrendered. The life you now live isn't one of constant effort or forced momentum. It is something like devotion, not to a god or a dogma, but to reality itself. You begin to feel that your very being is a kind of offering, a thread in a much larger fabric. You are no longer trying to change the world. You are listening to it, responding to it, being in right relationship with it. This is where true responsibility begins, not the responsibility imposed by external expectations, but the responsibility of one who knows they are free. Freedom is terrifying until it is fully embraced. As Sartre noted, man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. But once you've seen through the layers of illusion, ambition, identity, spiritual ego, this kind of freedom is no longer a burden. It becomes sacred. You are no longer performing. You are participating. In this new state, you are no longer motivated by the personal quest for salvation, financial, emotional, or spiritual. You are motivated by the act of serving the real, not because you should, but because anything else would be untruth. And what is the real? It is the moment, the breath, the subtle impulse that rises from the silence you once feared. It is the pull toward beauty without need for recognition. It is the instinct to help without needing to be the helper. It is the choice to speak, to create, to love, not because of reward, but because you can. The ego once asked, "What do I get from this?" The soul now asks, "What truth wants to be lived through me?" This is not passivity. This is power, the quiet, grounded power of a life rooted in reality rather than fantasy. The old motivations were spikes of energy, volatile, dramatic, loud. This new form is more like a tide, constant, fluid, inevitable. And with it comes a deep humility. You no longer see yourself as the protagonist. You are a page in a larger story, a wave in a vast ocean, and yet your existence is no less meaningful. In fact, it is only here, beyond the craving for meaning, that true meaning begins to shine. Aldous Huxley once wrote, "The more powerful and original a mind, the more it will incline towards the religion of solitude." But this solitude does not isolate you. It connects you deeply, because once the noise fades, you begin to see others again. Not as roles, not as threats, not as mirrors, but as souls, also walking their path through fire and silence and rebirth. You no longer live to satisfy others, nor to escape them. You live in resonance with what is most true in you, and from there you offer yourself. In words, in art, in quiet presence, in a simple meal shared without pretense. This is where the journey ends, not in transcendence, but in embodiment. And strangely, from this place of complete surrender, life begins to move again. Slowly at first, then freely, not as a chase but as a dance. You are moved to build, to create, to serve, not from hunger, but from fullness. The irony, of course, is that the motivation you long to recover was never lost. It was buried beneath roles, beneath fear, beneath the belief that you had to earn your right to exist. Now, having shed those layers, the motivation that remains is not motivation at all. It is being, and being is enough. Schopenhauer called life a pendulum between pain and boredom, but he did not account for awakening, the moment when you step off the pendulum entirely and begin to live, not in resistance to life's conditions, but in harmony with them. This is the quiet triumph of the awakened. Not that they feel motivated every day, but that they no longer need to, because when you've walked through the fire of awakening, through the desert of disillusionment, through the silence of the void, you don't live for motivation. You live for truth, and that is enough to move mountains in silence.